what did you think of President Trump's suggestion? Just buy a couple million barrels, call it a day?
Well, quite right. If you can buy it for very little, you may as well buy it and store it. But it does add to the stock. There's a little bit of space left to store oil around the world, but it'll be full very soon. And then we have to eventually decide, of course, what to do with it, because it's not going to stay in storage forever.
Well, right. So even if you buy it, you're still going to have to release it into the market when oil prices get high enough and the demand is actually there. Can you walk me through just the dynamics of how something like that works within the oil market?
Sure. So I think first look at supply. In history, supply has very rarely been a problem. There's always been too much oil around, and oil has been controlled by OPEC, and there's been plenty of it. I think with very low prices, production will drop in certain cases. But of course, people are impelled to keep production up because the cash cost of producing it is really very, very low indeed, probably less than $10 a barrel. But nonetheless, the full cost, the return on capital, can't be achieved at anything like that price. So I think prices will come down, production will come down, and certainly in the States, as new production is not added to the future. Demand, I think, very sluggish indeed. Will take a long time to recover. Obviously, it's down very heavily at the moment, around about 30%. But even it'll come back, I think, slowly, as people will be very reluctant to consume at the rate that they have been consuming before the behavior of people changed as a result of the virus. So I think
no doubt.
Would be not surprised if you look at oil prices being much lower for longer.
So based on that, the Texas Railroad Commission is going to have a meeting today where they're considering prorating cuts for Texas. Should that happen based on the scenario just laid out?
Well, that could happen. It's an unusual thing to do. I do recall when I first joined the industry that the Texas Railroad Commission was very active in managing production, and they may well do that. But even that, and combined with the cuts that have been promised by OPEC+, that will dig into, let's say, only 10 or plus % of oil supply, whereas we are producing probably 30% too much at the moment. So it will help, and none of that started yet. It will help underpin the price a bit, but the price, I think, will be sluggish for a very long time.
And you brought up OPEC+. There is conversation that they're going to move their cuts forward, maybe even take it deeper. The 8.5 million barrels of oil a day, OPEC's not, or Saudi Arabia has not really wanted to go below that, but maybe that could happen. Anything like that do a bigger dent or help price support even more?
Well, I think you really have to dent production a lot to support the price, but in the end, that's not sustainable. And it's exactly what we saw in 85 to 86, when eventually the cuts were not sustainable. People opened up the taps and the price of oil stayed low for about 17 years thereafter. There was a lot of oil. So it depends on the rate of growth of demand, and demand, I think, will, as I say, I can't see this growing very steeply for a very long time. So I think all of these are temporary things that underpin the price.
Yeah. I was saying, Lord Browne, could you help me understand the roadmap to then stronger demand? As in, do gasoline inventories need to come down, then refining margins improve, then we finally soak up some of the oil in the market? When we talk about demand recovery, what's the actual process of that?
Well, it is just that. First, it is underlying demand, so economic activity. Bear in mind that the rate of growth of GDP determines the rate of growth of oil very slowly. We are getting more and more efficient at using oil. Every year, we use 1.5% less oil for every increase in GDP. So GDP has to come up, inventories have to be consumed, and people really want to consume oil. So aviation, transportation, industry, a variety of things like that. I do think, however, there is a much bigger overlay on this today, and that is people's great concern about climate and the use of hydrocarbons, which generate both methane and carbon dioxide into the atmosphere and increase global climate change. I believe this is something that will carry on, and in terms of behavior, I do think people are beginning to reflect on viruses creating health problems, creating lung problems, and on one hand, and secondly, on natural phenomena like viruses coming to do things which are far more powerful than presidents or prime ministers can do to human beings. Climate change will be one of those things. So it wouldn't surprise me that over the period that we're talking about now, the medium term, that climate change will remain a very important damper on the consumption of crude oil.
And obviously, Wintershall Dea doing a lot on that front as well. You're deputy chairman there, former BP CEO. So put on that CEO hat for me. If you were looking at that short-term issue and the pricing issue, demand issue, and the longer-term transition, what kind of choices are you making today?
Well, first, I would probably much more balance into natural gas, which is exactly what that company's done. About 70% of its production is natural gas. Natural gas, I think, will be a laggard in being hit by climate change, provided it's used properly, primarily to produce electricity along with renewables, and oil to make sure that you basically use it, if you will, as a cash cow. I think not invest too much, but make sure you run it very efficiently, that you extract what you can while you can, but not to grow it enormously for the future. I believe that's the right thing. After all, I think
last question then for you.
Most of oil production is
up.
made by state companies, and it's always been the case, and they will provide for the future.
Do we ever see $60 oil again?
Never say never. It's always too early to tell, of course, and it would be foolish to predict. But I think on balance, I think the price will be lower rather than higher. I'd be surprised to see $60 in the short term for sure. Maybe one day, sometime in the future. Who knows?